Hello, everybody, and welcome to the LeanTossup Call of Duty League podcast. That's it, guys. Week 1 is in the books. It's on to week 2, and then on to a very long break, because that's how we do it here in the Call of Duty League. I am joined, as always, by my co-host CDLMetrics. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Yeah, week one was very fun to watch. 11 matches in the books. We learned a lot about some of these teams. Some teams I feel like had some mixed results, so TBD on a lot of them, but hopefully we'll get answers to those teams this weekend before, pretty lengthy break for Christmas and New Year's and all that good stuff. A little bittersweet because we'll go on break for a little while here, but at least we get a handful of matches before Christmas. That's good.
Yeah. And there was some very good matches this last week. So there's some interesting matches, some interesting takeaways. So let's hop right into those. First off the bat, I think this is going to be our opening segment, the race to 1580. This week was a little boring in terms of that because most of our teams played against each other, so we were guaranteed wins. And I have currently opened up an insurmountable 10-point lead. No, there's nothing really to report here at all. This is just, again, Ultra, probably my best team, has played one map, and FaZe has played two. But interesting to start with, though, and it's showing that I really like the way you're breaking this down with the colored bars to the team, so we can really see who's helping or hurting. So I'm gonna like that feature. That's nice. Okay, moving on. Beating the market, Major 1, Week 1 results. Not great. I would say we were directionally right, but wrong. And again, it just shows you how hard it is to make bets on Week 1. So Ultra minus 2.5, plus 110. I got closing line value on this. Is the kiss of death here in the CDL. That lost. They only won 3-1. I had Subliners minus 2.5, plus 120. They were up 2-0, and then they blew the control, and then they eventually won at 5. That's fine. And then Thieves versus Surge. Thieves had a lead. Surge broke them on Terminal in the Burger Hill. That basically, had they held that hill, they would have won map 4, forced a map 5, but Surge broke them and then broke them in Bookstore, and then that caused a Surge 3-1. A little bit of some rough rides there for me. You, on the other hand, also had some rough rides. Map 1 minus 1.5. You got 1, though. You did get 1, so you are ahead here.
Both of ours, we were 1-5 collectively, but we very easily could have been 5-1, I feel like, if some of these go the other way. And you said it, we were directionally right, but the results just didn't quite go our direction. It is what it is. It's 1 week, but at least, and that'll happen too when you consolidate like we did. You made one bet in 2 bets that LAG were going to be really bad, and it turns out they actually were okay. They didn't win any of their series, but they fought tough. And then with mine, so Atlanta do win 6-4 against LA Thieves. I made that my number 1 pick just because I thought Thieves and Breach were somewhat similarly power ranked, so I'll take the extra value with the matchup versus Thieves. Unfortunately, against Boston, that was a FaZe win, but it went to a round 11, so we missed that by a round. And then my third game was a reverse sweep. I was really confident in that when Vegas was up 2-0, and then Royal Ravens just turned on another gear, won the control, dominated the Game 4 hardpoint, and then clutched up to win a round 10 and a round 11 in Game 5. So, a bit of a breakdown from the Legion boys. I was debating whether to do this Legion game or the Legion game versus Rocker. Turns out I should have done the one versus Rocker. I was also debating Miami versus Ravens. Didn't put that in either. So, it could have gone a lot of different ways, but I think for the most part, our process was pretty good.
Yeah, and this will happen again. We said, and I literally said last week, and I followed this too, don't bet everything this week. There will be ups, there will be downs. Hold your powder. Again, don't bet any props at all. I did not bet any props at all. I have no idea. I didn't even track them. Just don't mess with some of this stuff. Not now. In the future, yes, but for now, no. All right. News of the week. So this is actually really cool. I'm really big fan of this. I'll let you go ahead and explain what you've done here.
So This is what I've been tracking since the 2020 season when we were playing Modern Warfare all online. That's when I first got into the COD League. And to me, it matters a lot. And specifically when teams match up, how much are you winning by, I think matters more than most people give it credit for. So this graph that you see here just shows the average margin of victory in a game of Hardpoint from a bunch of different timelines. The red bar on the far left is last week. On average, teams won by 51 points in Hardpoint. About a 250 to 199 win would be the average game, which is much, much closer than any other timeline we've seen. And it's a consistent trend opening weekends from the last several years. Opening weekend, Cold War season, the gap was 75 points per team. Then in Vanguard, that got chopped off by 10 points. Then a year later in MW2, another 5 points deducted. And then this year, 8 points off of that. Just a consistent trend that hard points are getting closer and closer, at least in opening weekends. I also included full season data to see how it shifts as the year goes on. So last year, really not much of a change at all. Most games ended around a 60-point difference. In Vanguard and in Cold War, the games got tighter as the year went on. And there's reasons for that. Obviously, map pools can fluctuate between games. Teams just understand the meta a little more as the game goes on. In theory, the skill gap between the teams should shrink as time goes on. Map vetoes get a little more obvious and understandable so teams can prepare for the maps they expect to play. I'm interested to see how this year compares to last year. I think it'll actually stay the same like it did last year. I think it's just hard for me to imagine it getting much closer than 51 points on average, but it very well could if, again, we switch up the maps or something changes in the meta that can drastically affect things. But yeah, just an interesting nugget that, at least for me, watching the games last weekend, it felt like we had a lot of close maps, and I think this data justifies that completely.
Yeah, 100%. And this data is fascinating. I have a couple questions first to ask. So, when you say opening weekend, do you just mean the opening weekend, or do you mean the first weekends up until the major?
Yeah, good question. And there are like preseason tournament stuff. So opening weekend for MW2, for Vanguard, and for Cold War is just the first weekend of regular online qualifiers. So in Cold War, I believe there was a weekend where they were like showcase matches. I think that every team played once and that was it. I did not include those for Cold War. In Vanguard, we had the Kickoff Classic that I think Surge beat Toronto on, or Toronto beat Surge. Yeah, Toronto beat Surge. I did not include that. So again, it's just the first weekend of regular qualifiers.
Right.
Yep, and then last year, I think the first games were regular online qualifiers. So nothing to tweak there. But yeah, no, good question.
Yeah, because I think last year they did 2 weeks of online qualifiers and then went right to the major, which was the Pro-Am major, which doesn't exist this year. Fascinating looking at this. It's really cool. So yeah, you make the good point that last year there was no real change from opening weekend to season-long stats. But the 2 years before, there's about roughly a 7-ish point gap between first week and longer season, like long term in the season, it gets closer. They become more competitive. Now, the interesting thing that struck me this last week was just how similar this game is to last year. It looks the same. It feels in many ways. I know it's not the same. There is different movement and the guns are different and there's increased health, but it just feels a lot the same. Like watching it again, like watching it with now there's reasons for that. They haven't changed the scoreboard in 4 years now. There's reasons why it looks the same, but I think and then again, when you look at it outside of Vanguard full season, this is one of the lowest, like most competitive map sets we've had. And we made this point last week when talking about betting hardpoint spreads. We talk about dead points like we do in football. And we said, okay, 50 is the, like, you could, like, in past years, going back to Cold War, even last year, we didn't mind betting a minus 25, minus 35, etc. But now I think you have to really think about that. And I think one of the reasons why last week was so close, especially, is that a lot of these maps have pretty strong money hills. And some of these are like one money hill after another money hill. So what would happen is Team 1 gets money hill. Team 2 tries a break. Doesn't work. They say, cool, whatever. Screw that. We're going to go hit the other money hill. Then the other team basically they hold that point. They try to break the new money hill. They fail. They say, screw it, we're going to go to the next hill. And I think because of that, both teams just soak up points, and it basically makes the end a lot more competitive. And this is the thing, right? To make the football comparison, right? If the spread in a game is, say, 3.5 points, right? And basically the team that's favored gets the ball with 2 minutes left in the game. Again, classic situation, your 2-minute drill. They get the ball with 2 minutes left in the game. They're not good. They're going down to kick a field goal. They have timeouts. They want to basically wait until there's 3 seconds left in the game, take a timeout somewhere around your opponent's 30-yard line, kick a game-winning field goal, game ends, that's it, done, right? They're not going down there to get a touchdown. They don't need to, right? Because if they score a touchdown, they can't control exactly when they cross the plane of the goal line. So they can't, like, when you kick a field goal, you can ensure that field goal is the last play of the game. If you score a touchdown, you can't ensure that the touchdown is the last play of the game. You're going to give the other team a chance to have the ball. Now, it's unlikely they'd score, but they could still theoretically score. So the correct thing to do is kick the field goal as time ends. This is similar in this case. So, for example, it's not exactly the same, but a similar instance is in hardpoint. Say you're at 225, and your opponents are at 170. They get a money hill. Okay, you could break the money hill, soak up 25 points, end the game. But you don't care because the next hill's a money hill. So you say, fine, take 60 seconds. I don't care. You can't win the game. You're going to get to 225. I don't care. Because then we get the money hill. We lock it down for 25 seconds. We win. And this is why Vanguard was closer to some extent. And this is why Modern Warfare 2 was where it was. And Cold War as well. Because when you have the ability to just lock down a money hill, you don't care. You'll let the other team get free points because the correct decision is always to lock down the next money hill. And I think that's why I don't think it's going to become less. I don't think it's become less competitive. I think they're going to be basically about the same, maybe even more competitive as teams just say, screw it, take 60 points, I don't care. I think that's what we're looking at for this year.
Yeah, totally agree. I think a lot of teams, especially on a map where there are multiple money hills and multiple money hills in sequence, I think, a lot of teams are going to do the math and say, okay, here's a money hill. We have 200 points. They maybe are at 220 and climbing, but that hill is going to get chopped off pretty soon and a new money hill. We don't care if they get to 230, 235. If we just rotate and get the money hill, we can hold down 50 seconds, and then there's your 15-point win, there's your 20-point win. So it gets interesting. I think because there are so many money hills, it makes hardpoint a little worse to watch overall, just because there's a lot of dead time where it's, okay, if a team is going to decide to rotate early, with, say, 30 seconds left on the clock, 35 seconds left on the clock, that just means the teams are separated on the map pretty well. You're still trying to get rotation kills. Maybe you try to attack the hill with limited resources, see if you can get a 1v2 or just rip them off of scrap time. Teams are going to have this delicate balance of, okay, how much pressure do we put on the hill that's live, and how many resources do we commit to just turtling up and getting ready for the next hill, because that matters a lot. Now, we've heard spawns are going to change in hardpoint drastically into the new year. We'll see about that. Obviously, if there are new maps in the rotation eventually that have less money hills, this could mean not a lot come a month or two from now. But overall, I think right now, at least with how the maps play out, we're going to get a lot of close hard points. That being said, a lot of money hills on one map could lead to really big blowouts. And we saw that a handful of times when there were mismatches with two teams. We saw, I think, Toronto beat LG by 140 on sub base, which is a really small map, and I think will be close all year. So those will still happen, because if you can somehow chain those money hills together, well, now you have a 100-point lead in the blink of an eye, and You just have to play for trades the rest of the way out, and ideally you'll hold that 100-point lead, if not make it grow. It's fascinating because it's all like a math problem that teams have to figure out. But yeah, interested to see if that gap between teams expands or even shrinks a little more than we saw this past weekend.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that as well. I think what we might do is we might do maybe either after the major or right before the major, we'll maybe look at all online qualifiers before each major and then make that comparison and see if that holds too. That'd be a neat comparison to do a couple weeks from now. Search and destroy margin of victory. So again, close. Look, you're looking at last year, you're looking at 3, 2.8. It's basically always roughly average margin of victory is about 3, so your classic 6-3 win. 2.1. And again, when you're talking about betting and you see the plus 1.5s, those are pretty valuable. Or specifically, if the other thing too is if you think there's a real mismatch, if you think one team is much, much better, it means that you're probably going to get a better price on a minus 1.5. A minus 1.5 is going to be like plus 120, plus 130, right? And that's a really nice angle to have as well. If you see, okay, this team has really figured out search and destroy, you're not really afraid to bet that. But if they haven't, this is when, this is where if you're defaulting something, you're just going to be like over 9.5, over plus 1.5 for search.
Yeah, I think now this is actually like a more drastic difference than in the hard point. Like the difference between this year and last year, you said it perfectly. Like it's about 2.8 to 3 rounds difference on average for the last 3 years completely. And search and destroy, for the most part, plays pretty similarly every year. Now, why this year are the 6-3s now 6-4s, or 6-4s or 6-5s now? I just think it's like a small sample size. We only played, I don't even know, probably 15 search and destroys, 16 search and destroys this weekend. I think it will come up to that 2.8 level as time goes on, but it might not. It might stay a little lower if, for some reason, the search and destroy map set, if a lot of maps are very defensive favored or very offensive favored, that could lead to tighter games. One that just jumps out from the Cold War season was Checkmate Search and Destroy. Very defensive favored, and it was very rare that you had a game not go to a round 11 because a ton of games would just be defense wins, just constantly back and forth. You get to a round 11, hopefully your team has defense. So we saw a lot of round 11s on that map. Now, there are some search maps in this game that feel pretty defensive favored, but I didn't really see anything all weekend that seemed to suggest that we're going to have a map like Checkmate or something of that liking. So I think this number will just naturally go up, but just interesting to see that, at least for the most part, teams are pretty close in search and destroy right now. And will that change with roster moves and map changes? Yes, definitely. But yeah, it just jumped off the page. Again, I think this matters a little less than hardpoint, but still, overall, it's just an interesting nugget to see that teams were this competitive in a mode that is pretty skill-based. So yeah, and then we can move on to control as well. Control, not much change. Again, it is a little tighter than last year, but there's some wild swings. Like in Vanguard and in Cold War, the control margin of victory actually went up as the year went on, as teams tried to figure that out. Again, map sets changed. Last year was mostly the same. Control, we'll see how it plays out from here on out. Didn't move the needle as much as hardpoint or search did, but it's still interesting to see.
I feel like a little bit of splitting hairs there between a 1.8, 1.9, and 2, right? I think it just means that they've started designing control better, where it's, hey, you can win an offensive round. Versus, like, literally back in original Vanguard and original Cold War, like, you couldn't, like, only the best teams could win an offensive round. That was like, going back to Cold War, that was like, Ultra could win an offensive rounds once they had insight, and FaZe could, and that was it. I think literally those are the only people those are the only teams you could reliably consider to win an offensive round. Anybody else was like, oh wow, they won an offensive round. Good for them. Congratulations. Literally, anybody else was like, this is expected to go to round 5. And same as Vanguard. But like this year, I think last year especially, either something with the new mechanics or just game design, or they figured out better places to put these. These are like actually functional control maps where you can win an offense. It's not impossible to win offensively. Plus, also, it's the new now. The other ones, I think they implemented whoever had defense round 5 as tick counter later in those seasons. I think they implemented a late Vanguard season, if I remember correctly. And then they implemented it. I think that was the full implementation for Modern Warfare 2, and then obviously for full for this weekend as well. So that has an impact. It means you're going to be playing a bit more aggressively. Sometimes you just actually win, right? I think in some cases before it was like, okay, we're on offense, we got our 4 ticks. That's it, guys. Pack it up. We're done. We don't want to We don't want to waste more lives, right? But now it's okay. Let's actually just go for the win now because we can. And I think there's a lot of games before where someone could have won, but they didn't want to throw lives away, so they just said, "Yeah, we got the extra tick. We're good now. Let's just we have a live lead. We don't need to do anything now."
For sure. Yeah, totally agree about all that. Yeah, so I think this number will stay pretty much where it is. The maps feel pretty well balanced. So, yeah, we'll see moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. Top player performances. So this is a tactical rab poll on YouTube. Shout out to him. Who is your CDL opening weekend MVP? I feel a little, maybe this is some Toronto Ultra bias, but obviously some of these teams played 2 games. Ultra only played 1 game. But again, whatever, it doesn't matter. It is just opening week. No one's getting extra points or something for this. But yeah, I do agree it was simp, though. I'm not disagreeing with the poll. It was simp, but this is not a fair and balanced award because many teams only play 1 game. But whatever, that's not the point. But yeah, I completely agree with this. I think simp is pretty good, but I still have questions about FaZe, though. I'm not completely sold. They should have put Boston away. That should have been a 3-0. Maybe a 3-1. That should have been a 3-0 or a 3-1. And again, against Thieves, okay, yeah, they won 3-0, but it was a very unconvincing 3-0. Illy looked pretty good as well, but I don't know. I think it's hard to... I was thoroughly unimpressed by all the candidates for MVP, if that makes sense. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, totally agree. Simp was the weekend MVP. I get what you're saying about Toronto, but yeah, they only played 1 match, so it's a little tricky. If they absolutely just crushed LA Gorillas and one of the players had a 1.9 KD, maybe he's in consideration, but yeah, Simp was lights out, and it makes sense too, right? The year he dominated and won MVP was Cold War, which to me is the game that most similarly resembles this game. Movement is increased, 150 health points. It just makes sense that Simp would do this in an AR meta as well. We'll see if that changes as the year goes on, but the fact that he's doing this when ARs are as powerful as they are, pretty impressive because you see the other list, or the rest of the guys on this list. Illy, mainly an AR. Kenny, mainly an AR. Skies, all he runs is an AR. Yeah, it's a really impressive weekend from Simp, but I totally get what you're saying about FaZe. Although he was dominant, FaZe maybe could have looked better against Boston and against Thieves, but still got the job done. 2 wins, no losses. So yeah, it's hard to argue against anyone but Simp.
Yeah. Let's talk more about external news here. It was announced on, I think, Wednesday? Because last week, or no, Thursday. It was announced Thursday, right? Because we did the podcast last Wednesday, and we said, where are we watching it? I don't know. And then on Thursday, it's actually, you're watching it on YouTube. And that was announced after we did the podcast. And we actually had no idea. I assumed it was going to be both, but nope, it was YouTube. Yeah, so they signed the YouTube deal, finally, after a long time of apparently debating whether or not to. And then, do you want to explain what happened next?
Yeah, so a lot has happened in the last week since this has emerged. And actually, a lot of news has dropped today. So anyway, last week, the news comes out Thursday afternoon, I think it was, that Call of Duty League will be streamed exclusively on YouTube, which I called, but it's not ideal. I'm not happy about it. I think it should be on Twitch as well. But the Friday morning, I think, of the game starting, I think it was Friday morning. I might be wrong on that. But on the flank, or on his stream, Zuma and Ben of the flank discussed that they had an email sent to them that said, listen, You cannot stream the matches on Twitch live or after the fact. It has to be YouTube if you want to show actual game footage from CDL matches, which is a bummer, but makes sense, right? If the COD League is exclusively on YouTube gaming, I understand why YouTube would want the league to just crack down on anything being shown on Twitch. A lot of sports leagues have these kind of exclusive streaming rights deals anyway. But it's a bummer nonetheless, just because the flank and the breakdown with Scump, they've been able to do this on Twitch and YouTube without any penalty, really. So they like it on Twitch because there's more viewers there. So it's a bummer. The flank and the breakdown did like a co-stream event to talk about everything last week. So that was cool to see the two of them merge for something. But just earlier today, I saw Zuma on the flank was showing clips from last week, and his chat was like freaking out. Zuma, what are you doing? Stop. You're going to get canceled or whatever. And then Zuma explained like, hey, I talked with the league. They said it's all good now. I can show clips. Does that mean he can show live matches on Twitch, watch partying? I don't think so. But at least there is an easing of the policy where Zuma can now show CDL clips, matches, whatever, on Twitch after the fact. So that's a step in the right direction, but still, it just goes to show that this league is like, I don't know, just not all the way there in the head when it comes to like easy decisions like this. But if Zuma and Scump and those guys can now watch film on Twitch, good with me. But just so much drama in the last week that had to do with this stuff.
Yeah, unclarity is always great in professional sports leagues. That's what we all live for. There is so much wrong with all of this. And I think, I can't remember I think we talked about this last year, I think. And I basically said, this going to YouTube is very clearly just it's a dying cash grab. It's like, we want cash, Twitch won't give us cash, YouTube gives us more cash, therefore we're just going to do YouTube, and then we're going to use that cash to try to paper over whatever cracks we have. We don't care about growing this thing anymore. We don't care about the good of the sport. We don't care about the good of the esport. We don't care about growing our brands. All we care about is the YouTube cash. And they showed it. Two of their biggest brands, and again, of two of their biggest stars ever. Zuma, again, one of the biggest. There is no COD Hall of Fame as far as I know at this point, but clearly Zuma and Scump would be in it, along with Methods as well. They would probably also be in the Call of Duty Hall of Fame if there was one, which eventually there will be. To be fair, most of these guys are like late 20s, so that's coming one day, but just not quite yet. But they just said, you know what, we don't care about those brands. And the other thing too is that the breakdown with Scump is like explicitly run by one of their franchise teams. And also to the extent the flank is as well. Now I believe it's sponsored by FaZe. It's not specifically run by FaZe, but the breakdown is explicitly run by FaZe because you have the owner. Sorry, is explicitly run by Optic because you have the owner of Optic appearing on that most of the time during watch parties. They just sold out not only some of their biggest stars, their biggest brands, but also one of their owners. They just said, you know what? We are taking the money from YouTube. And clearly YouTube said to them, you need to crack down on this because people are going to start watching it on Twitch and we're not going to get the ad revenue from that. And they said, okay, that's fine. You're paying us millions of dollars a year. We don't care about that. We will screw over our people in exchange for that money. And that's a huge problem. And I think people are going to say, oh, they did not have to do this. If Activision genuinely cared about growing the sport, getting it to a point when you don't have to make the decision between, do we take money to cover our expenses or do we try to grow the sport? If you grow the sport, you'll never have to worry about that decision again. But they decided instead to opt for short-term cash. And I think that's the fundamental problem with this league. I think if this league was confident enough that this could succeed long-term, they'd bet on themselves and they'd say, yes, we can grow this. We can make a competitive league long-term that could rival the best esports leagues in the world, maybe even rival professional sports leagues one day. They would say, yes, we have the property here. We are confident enough in it. We will sacrifice in the short term to grow long-term. But they didn't do that. They said, give me the money now. And I think that fundamentally says everything you need to know about the CDL.
Yeah. Agree.
Yeah. Okay. This is fun. So it's also funny because this week in the NFL, there was a huge officiating controversy with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills as well. Similar to this in some cases with Kadarius Toney lining up offside on the one play, and then they called back this amazing play because he was offside. And it was funny because I was reading about this and I'm like, I think it was happening basically at the same time, but it's funny that happened almost at the same time. Yeah, so apparently, because, and again, another fun feature of this league, is that because there is no CDL rule set, because there's no rank play yet, they have to manually set the rules for every game to the CDL rule set, the unofficial CDL rule set. And they forgot to do it this time, so there was a 10-second delay in the hardpoint activation. So therefore, they basically, they couldn't get points for several seconds, and at the end, Surge got in the point first, they couldn't collect points for several seconds, and then they eventually lost by 7, which, I don't know, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think this is egregious, or do you think this is just...
Yeah, it's just weird on a number of levels. One, the ref, whoever put in the rule set, missed something. Oops. Refs make mistakes. Refs are humans. That happens. That sucks. But ideally, we're playing a video game. That rule set should just be one button that we press and we're good to go. And we shouldn't have to worry about this. But because the game is still relatively young, we need a person to manually put in everything. It's just silly. It's also weird because, like, Seattle, if this was an issue that they noticed immediately, which I think you would, you jump in the point, and I paused the screenshot as soon as Surge got into P1, and you can see it's 7 seconds into the game. Yeah, there's a 3 or 4 seconds of collected time that they could have had, which it does matter. They lost by 7. A lot of games are going to be close. And if you're spawning on the good side of the map, where P1 is favorable for you, every little second counts. And I don't know how Surge... Maybe they did bring it up to the ref, and the ref was like, we're not going to replay it, because to me, it would make sense that you would. The Seattle Surge should have seen, oh, hardpoint's locked. That's not right. Ref, can we restart? 10 seconds into the game. Surge somehow missed it. The ref didn't automatically restart it on their own because they didn't notice it. It was just weird. Eventually, I think Surge did because Arcides tweeted out like, man, it sucks. We didn't get that hard point off the rip. So they lost the map. Surge ended up winning 3-1 anyway in the series. It doesn't really matter unless tiebreakers come into play at some point. But yeah, just a weird one. Hopefully this doesn't happen again. Or if it does happen, it happens in a game that's not decided by 7 points. So yeah, just weird all around. Again, if the CDL rule set is in the game, we don't have to worry about this anymore. But hopefully the refs and the players will just double check, triple check that everything is good before we actually jump into the live game. Yeah, just unfortunate that this happened, but doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, probably.
Yeah, you do make a good point about choosing strong side or weak side. Part of the calculation is that you get the extra points early too, right? You will be in the point first. You will get those extra points uncontested, right? Because you're spawned closer to it, right? Now, whether or not that matters doesn't really matter. It generally doesn't matter that much, but like it cost them a couple seconds, and that can change the games. Now, to be fair, Surge won 3-1, so it doesn't really matter. But if you had Surge map 1, I actually just had Surge moneyline here, so it didn't really matter. But if you had, and actually I think Surge was, I can't remember if they were dogs or not on the map. I think they may have been slight favorites on the hard point at close. But, or maybe they were 8.5 point dogs, I think. Yeah, they were 8.5 point dogs, so they would have covered either way. But I guess if you had Surge moneyline, you would have been affected. But it's dumb, and hopefully we can fix this going forward. So yeah, according to esports charts, they do this for all major esports, not just Call of Duty. They do it for League, for CSGO as well. Peak viewership from first week last year is down 42% from last year. Why do you think that is? I'll let you go first on that. Why do you think?
Yeah, we don't have to touch on this for very long. It's because of the Twitch YouTube thing. Yeah, last year the opening weekend matches were on both channels, or both websites, I should say. The numbers last year were like 180,000, even more than that maybe, for the highest matches of the weekend, and now we're at 106. It is quite a drop-off. It's unfortunate to see, but expected, and to no one's surprise, Both optic matches are number 1 and number 2, and the opening match, FaZe versus Boston, was number 3. Yeah, just sad to see, but it shows the COD League, hey, look at how many less eyeballs are on your product now that you're YouTube exclusive. Unfortunate, but it is what it is. Yeah.
I kind of feel like they probably would have been like, 30%. I don't think it was half. I don't think their number was its half. But that's my take on it. I will also say that this did start later too. Last year the game released earlier, and then I believe they were playing matches before the end of November. Now we're not the deepest into December, but we're like a week or two into December. Like we're basically a week into December, because I think we got a full major in before Christmas. I think, right? Yeah,
almost. They played. All the teams played 4 qualifier matches before Major 1. But Major 1 I want to say Christmas. So they really squeezed it in, which was good. Obviously, 4 online qualifiers for seeding isn't ideal, but that was also like a Pro-Am tournament where there was group play involved, a mix of online and LAN, and a double elim bracket, or maybe single elim bracket. I am forgetting. But yeah, last year, I want to say we started like December 2nd last year, so I'm not sure if it was November, but it was about 1 week earlier than what we're starting with now. Yeah, getting that schedule right, it's always going to be a delicate balance, because it depends a lot on when the game releases. Do you have enough time to squeeze in qualifiers and a major before Christmas? Or do you do what we're doing this year, where you split it up and have a break? Or do you just wait until January to start all this? Ideally, you're not going to do that, but it's one of the downfalls of this league is it's up in the air when we start every year. We know about when, but it's fluctuated quite a bit over the last few years. We'll see if that changes moving forward. I don't think it will, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. So this is actually some positive news. We just talked for a while about a bunch of negative news. This is actually some positive news. I guess is it I hold shift or L hold shift? I think it's L hold shift, right?
I hold shift, yes.
I hold shift. Okay, he joined the CDL talent lineup, and he is the replacement for Lando with Study. And as you mentioned here, he's previously casted CDL Challengers, College COD Mobile. I know him more from College COD and CDL Challengers. And I'd watch CDL Challengers sometimes, not all the time, but when I did, he was always the highlight of it. He's a really good play-by-play commentator. And honestly, in my opinion, it's really hard to differentiate his level of commentary from Miles or Maven, or was Maven? No, Merc is the play-by-play, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in my opinion, he's right up there with them. I think he's basically equivalent to them. I think he's really good. He's got great voice, great commentating style for it. Yeah, I love him. He's great.
Yeah, well deserved. I'm actually a little surprised we didn't think of this last week, because last week we mentioned Bryce and Tun out, Lando stepping away, will Study get a partner? I just completely blanked on the fact that I Hold Shift could be a candidate for that. I've watched him a handful of times in Challengers. He's been phenomenal. He brings a lot of energy. He knows the game inside and out. Just a great pick, an obvious pick, one that I probably should have mentioned last week, but I just blanked on. But yeah, deserved for him. Killed it with his first couple streams on Sunday, I think it was. And yeah, so happy for him. And yeah, we'll see him at the major in Boston in not too long of a time. So well deserved. Congrats, yeah. I Hold Shift. And Study, you got a good partner. Don't mess it up.
Okay, so we have 10 matches this week. And the odds, of course, are by Bet365. We're not sponsored by them. We just like using them because they have consistent odds that are easily accessible. So this is a race to 1580 match. This is my team versus your team, and it's dead even. -120 on each side. Heretics -1.5 plus 162. Legion +1.5 -225. Heretics 8.5 point favorites in the hard point, but then Legion is favored ever so slightly in the search, but then Heretics is favored in the control. Now to be clear, at this point we have no models at this point. for the simple reason that Ultra, like some of these teams have played one game, Ultra specifically. I'm just gonna use that example because that's the team I think of when I think of only playing one game. You can't do anything, right? You like so for example, and I'll give the example here for why you can't model anything right now. Ultra's played one game. We know they're much better than LAG. That's it. We know they are a much, much better team than LG. Now, to be fair, though, Subliners actually played a very competitive game with them. So the way you'd stack it would be like you'd have Subliners here, LAG a little behind them, and then you have Ultra way up there. And the problem is that's all well and good. That's fine. But the problem is the fact that there's no way to quantify how much better, like where those teams are relative to the rest of the teams. You're going to start having weird, fluky results. Like it's going to be like LAG is the third best team. Or like Toronto is like destroys everybody 2 like 3-0. So you need a couple more games, and I'm probably gonna build it over the break. And it'll still be rough for probably a week or two, but by Major 1 it'll be ready and good and ready. So I'm excited for that. But anyways, back to this match. I gotta take Miami here. I don't understand why this is minus 120 each way. Do you see a reason why this is minus 120 each way?
Not particularly. Yeah, I don't think the book is reacting enough to the one match that we saw from Miami. So you mentioned Toronto only played once. The only other team that had one game was Miami, and they looked phenomenal. They swept Carolina. Carolina was favored in that match. I mentioned last week, I don't know, Miami could come out. I believe Miami was a plus 120 dog when we recorded. I was like, I don't see why they couldn't beat Ravens. They 3-0 swept them. Now, a couple of those maps were pretty close. If I pull up the results from last week, we had a 229 to 250 hard point, so that's 21 point margin, very close. Around 10 in search went to Miami, and then control was a 3-0, so Miami looked decisive in that. That's obviously their biggest map favored for this series. Vegas we saw twice. They went to a game 5 both times. Their search and destroy looked very good. They only dropped one, and that was the round 11 loss to Carolina. So I understand why they're a slight favorite in search. But yeah, to me, Miami should be a little heavier favorite in hardpoint. Vegas did not look particularly good in their hardpoints. Going into the year, that's how I expected this Vegas team to look. I thought their strength might be in search, maybe a little weak in the respawns. Miami, I really didn't know what to think of. I still don't really know what to think of them. I think they looked really good in one match, TBD against some other team. So for me, this one is mostly a pass, but I agree with you. I think Miami maybe has some value in here, just with the books maybe not reacting enough to what they did last weekend. And justifiably so. It's one match. We'll see from there, and it's against Ravens. So how good are Ravens? We'll talk about them later. But yeah, I agree. I think Miami should be maybe a slighter, heavier favorite in this one.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Normally we do a bit more analysis as to how much more favored, but really hard. I think this is Miami or nothing here, I think. Thieves versus Breach. This is another race to 1580. I have Thieves there, you have Breach. Minus 163 on the money line for the Thieves, plus 120 for Breach, minus 1.5, plus 137, plus 1.5, minus 188 for Breach. Thieves are a 12.5 point favorite in hardpoint. They're 1.5 point favorite, but shaded to plus 120 there. They're 1.5 point favorites in search, but plus 120 on that. And then they're the favorites, bare favorites in minus 138 favorites in the control as well. This one is a bit more iffy. I'm staying away from this one. I agree Thieves should be favored. I agree that... Yeah, actually, that's all I agree with. Maybe they're better at hardpoint than Breach. But I'm okay with just leaving this one alone. This one seems to me let's just watch this one.
Yeah, that's fair. I like Breach in this one, and for many reasons. One, preseason power rankings, I had Breach 5, LA Thieves 6. So going into the year, I thought Breach maybe slightly better than Thieves. You had Thieves, I think, one spot higher than Breach. So I understand why you're like, Thieves maybe should be favored. But you look at last week, they played the same two teams, and Boston just played better than Thieves in just about every game mode. I think you could argue Thieves looked better in control. They 3-0'd Seattle, and they lost 3-2 against FaZe. Seattle, on the other hand, in control, lost 3-1. Or I'm sorry, what am I looking at? Boston. I'm looking at Boston 3-1 FaZe and lost 3-2 to Seattle. I think you give a slight edge to Thieves in control, but hard points, Boston kept them closer than Thieves, and Searches too. To me, I think these teams should be close to what we saw in the last match, like 50-50, I would call it, if not maybe favor Breach slightly. I like Breach a little bit here, less so in control, but I think they can definitely keep it close in hard points and in Search. And I think the plus 120 is just a little too much. So I like Breach. I get why you think Thieves might bounce back. They're power ranked very highly in the coaches poll. They looked pretty good in that series versus FaZe despite getting swept. But yeah, for me, I just think Breach showed more, and I believed in them more going into the year. So I'll side with the boys from Boston.
Yeah. You know what? I think fundamentally this comes down to, do you think FaZe is a good team? Are they a good team that played Thieves and Breach that are good teams? Or do you think they're like an okay team that played bad, like a bad Breach, or bad is the right word, because they're not bad teams, but they're an okay team that played two okay teams, right? I think, depending on how you score that, I think if you think they're a good team and then both these other teams were good teams, that's why it was close, then it makes sense, right? Because then you could say, oh, that's how Boston took them to Game 5, and that's how Thieves got 3-0'd, but made it a very close 3-0, right? Versus the alternative, which is the fact that FaZe is at the same level of Thieves and Breach, and they're all just okay. And I don't know. I think I am, based on the results, I think I'm much more willing. We had a good sense for where Thieves and Breach were. Now, I'm not saying FaZe is a bad team, but I feel like maybe they need some work to do. And this team, we know this team has grinded out before. This team has looked not great at times, and they've pulled it out in the end. But I just think this might be one of those FaZe teams where it's, okay, we're not there yet, and we're going to have to grind our way to get there. I feel like at this point, FaZe is just an okay team and not the best team. I think we're not doing power rankings this week for obvious reasons, but I wouldn't power rank FaZe first at all, really. Would you have FaZe first? If you had to do a power ranking, would you have FaZe first or no?
Yes.
You
Yeah.
still would? Okay. All right.
FaZe they're just so consistent year to year, and maybe this is the year that they don't finish number one in the regular season, but they've done it every year. They're 2-0 through the first weekend. I know it wasn't perfect, but they played what we think are decent teams, right? We had Breach and Thieves in that next tier down, 6th, 7th best teams in the league, now that we've seen what Surge looks like. So yeah, they lost a couple maps to some quality teams. That happens. And I know you'd argue Toronto are the best team in the game, and I totally get it. I just think we need to see more from them, right? They played one match. They looked really good in the respawns. You got tripped up in the search, but yeah, I got to put FaZe one. They've been there all the time. Yeah.
Fair. Okay. Third match, again another 1580 match. Optic versus Surge. Optic's minus 175 on the money line. Surge plus 125. Optic minus 1.5 plus 110. Surge plus 1.5 minus 150. Optic is 15-point favorites in the hard point, minus basically even on the search, and then minus 188 favorites in the control. I like Surge here. Optic was very unimpressive. Okay, they took subliners to a Game 5. Okay, they lost. That could have been that game, the series against subliners could have been a 3-0 for subliners. And then subliners then got taken to a Game 5 by Gorillas, a team we didn't think was good. And Surge, on the other hand, they beat Thieves 3-1, and then they beat Boston 3-1, clearly putting themselves above teams that we has middle-of-the-pack teams. And this is also a Hook revenge game, probably in RCD's revenge game somehow too. I'm not sure exactly how, but probably somehow in RCD's revenge game. Yeah, I like Surge. I like Surge here. I think there's a lot of questions on Optic. I think I'm not sure. I don't think there's a problem with Optic per se. I think again, this is a very there are good teams, there are bad teams, and Optic was able to handle Rocker pretty easily, which like I think they're among the worst teams in the league, so they should handle them. Now it was a 3-1, and I'm not really gonna split hairs there and say it should have been a 3-0, but whatever. But yeah, I like Surge. I think Surge could definitely take down Optic here. I don't hate the +1.5, and I don't hate the +125, and maybe even sprinkle a little bit on that hard point spread. 15.5 games are more competitive. I think Surge could definitely cover that against an Optic team that seems a little vulnerable in hard point. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is priced about right, but I lean Seattle if I do have to pick a side. Yeah, just based on what we saw last weekend. And we mentioned it last week. Seattle played Thieves and Breach, who we thought were all in that same tier, and we would figure out if one of those teams jumps out and impresses. And it, yeah, no doubt was Seattle Surge, 3-1 against both of those teams. Granted, a lot of the maps were close, but 2-3-1s against quality teams is great to see, especially from a team that we had questions on going into the year. The coaches seem to like them. The preseason tournaments seem to like them. So I get it with the Surge team. This is a big match, right? Like, to me, last weekend showed that maybe we were wrong about there being a group of 4 at the top, right? FaZe, Ultra, Subliners, Optic. I think that's what we leaned going into the year. I think Optic and New York are, I would say, comfortably one tier below FaZe and Ultra. And Seattle, if they beat Optic, if they impress in this match, I don't see why you couldn't throw Surge in with Optic and New York, just because, yeah, like you said, both of those teams underperformed, mixed results from each of them. But yeah, this is a fascinating matchup. Maybe my favorite of the weekend for this weekend, and there's a lot of good ones. But yeah, I Seattle here. The Search and Destroy is interesting, right? Seattle looked great in that game mode. Optic did not win any search, but Optic did lose a round 11 in all 3 of their searches. If that gets flipped around, if luck goes their way a little bit moving forward, I think they'll be okay. But this Seattle Surge team looks legit in search. I get why Optic is a pretty heavy favorite in Control. That's the one game mode where Seattle looked iffy on. But yeah, I think this could go to a map 5, and I would not be shocked if Seattle pull this one out. So I totally get the Surge pick from you.
Yeah. I will say I'm actually pretty excited about Surge being good, partly because I drafted them, but also partly because it proves that you can do Moneyball in Call of Duty. So I'm pretty happy about that, because this is the definitive, outside of them and Thieves, this is like our city's coming off of a contract, basically got dropped by LAG. We can pick him up for cheap. Hook getting dropped by Optic. We can pick him up for cheap. Illy also being dropped by Optic. We can pick him up for cheap too. Then a random rookie from Europe. That's a beautiful mixture right there. That's perfect Moneyball. I love that. Love whenever we can do Moneyball in sports. Saturday. Moving on to Saturday. Miami versus Rocker. Rocker somehow the favorite in this one. Not sure how that works. Miami -110, Rocker -125, and then, but they're heavily favoring this to go over. They're heavily favoring Miami to keep this close. +1.5, -225. Minnesota -1.5, +162. Heretics inexcusably somehow 10.5 point underdogs in the hard point. I got nothing here. Can you explain? I have no idea. This line makes 0 sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's just the books are being a little slow to react to Miami. They don't want to overdo it because it was one match that we saw them play last week. But yeah, Minnesota, my Minnesota Rocker, underwhelmed. They go to a map 5 versus Vegas because they couldn't close out map 4. And like Minnesota just get dominated in Search and Destroy in that series. Then they go and play Optic on Sunday. They get a search win, but again, round 11, that could go either way.
50-50.
Yeah. Minnesota looked not good in the respawns against Optic. They looked okay against Vegas. So yeah, I think if anything, the prices should be just completely flipped. Now, part of me is a little scared because you go back and you look at that coaches poll that Breaking Point published, and they had Minnesota 6th in the league. And I think a lot of that is based on just like hard point scrims and a little bit of control scrims. So maybe Minnesota are better in respawn than what they showed last weekend, and maybe Miami aren't going to 3-0 everybody they play. But I don't know. To me, Ravens and Rocker are probably in the same tier of teams-ish. They're pretty close. And we just saw Miami beat Carolina last week pretty easily. I don't really get it. I feel like a lot of people are going to like Miami, and understandably so. So this line might shift as the week goes on. But yeah, I'm with you. I think it's Miami or nothing in this one. As a fan, I'm rooting for Rocker, but I will not be surprised if Miami look good and Rocker falls to 0-3.
Yeah, agreed. Next match on Saturday, Las Vegas Legion versus Subliners. Subliners understandably favorites here. Minus 350 on the money line, minus 1.5, minus 175. 32-point favorites in hard point, 1.5-point favorites in map 2, and in search and destroy, and then pretty heavy favorites there in control. I'm not touching this. I see zero value here at all. We talked about how close hard points have been this year. 32, at least for me right now, is the number where I don't want to touch it. At least not without a model. The thing is, there's either one of two things, and we'll talk about this more, but either LAG is good or LAG is bad. And I think LAG is good, but if I think LAG is good, I'd rather just bet on LAG rather than bet on Subliners, which are like a proxy for LAG, if that makes sense. I'm going to just not touch this one.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if anything, the Vegas map 2 looks a little interesting. They're even money to win it, minus 175. Just to force around 11. They have a better margin of victory than New York, despite New York winning all of their searches last week. New York won 3 round 11s and a round 10. So very close throughout. Vegas dominated Minnesota, like I said before. They won 6-4 against Carolina and then dropped a round 11 against Carolina. So, yeah, to me, it would not be surprised if Vegas are just a better search and destroy team. You could convince me on that, but anything else, I think New York is a clear favorite in hard point and in control. That probably carries them to a 3-1 victory in my eyes, but yeah, the prices on here are just a little too accurate. It's a pass for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not touching that. FaZe versus Surge. This is actually one I like. FaZe minus 300 on the money line. Surge plus 225. FaZe minus 1.5, minus 138. Surge plus 1.5, plus 100. 25-point favorites in the hard point. What has FaZe done to deserve that? Search and destroy pretty even, and then control pretty even as well. You have to take Surge here. So last week I bet Thieves spread money line against FaZe. That obviously backfired, but directionally that was the correct bet because those were 3 really close maps. They couldn't close out any of them. But I think that was the right call. I think we're just going to run it back here at a better odds too. I think the line was similar last week too. But I think just run it back, Surge, spread money line, and off we go. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I get why FaZe is a big favorite. They, I think, deserve it because of how good they've been over the years. That being said, I do think they underwhelmed across the board last weekend, just ever so slightly. I think their hardpoint record was good, but a ton of their maps were close. Their search and destroy was good, but again, close. Control looked a little iffy. And yeah, like we said before, like Seattle had a phenomenal weekend, maybe the best weekend of any team. Yeah, the 25.5 point spread in map 1 jumps out to me. If you look at the 4 games that FaZe played last week, they never won by 25 or more points. And you look at the 4 hard points that Seattle played, they never lost by more than 25 points. To me, that jumps out the page. Seattle can keep it close. I like the plus number in a game like this we just discussed earlier. The hard point margin of victory looks way less than previous years. So can Seattle get to 225? I think they can. You look at Search and Destroy, Seattle looked really good in that. They're a plus 110 dog there. FaZe obviously could slip up in that. Yeah, I think FaZe is maybe just slightly overpriced in this one. I still expect them to win because they are my power rank number one team. But what a weekend for Surge. You play Optic on Friday, and then you turn around and you play FaZe on Saturday. That's a really tough couple of matches. Definitely a step up in competition than what they faced last weekend. And we'll see if they can hang with one of these teams. Even if they go 1-1 this weekend, I still think that's a win if you're a Seattle Surge fan. And it just shows that, yes, your team belongs in this discussion of the top teams in the league. And if that's the case, their outlook for champs looks good. Maybe they could even win a major this year. So yeah, big weekend for Surge. I think they fall a little short in this one, but don't be surprised if it goes to a map 5 and if Surge can somehow squeak out a victory.
Yeah, agreed. That's why I don't hate Surge and taking some money line there as well. Saturday match 4, Ultra versus Ravens. Ultra, prohibitive favorites here. Yeah, I'm not touching this. I got burned by touching the stove twice last week. I'm not touching this again. I don't like anything here. Minus 40, Minus 1.5 control, search, no. Minus 1.5 control, Toronto wins this. This line is correct. I'm not touching it.
Yeah, I'm in agreement here. I think I was a little surprised to see it this big of a number on Ultra, but after looking into it more, I get it. Carolina, I think we had a good read on last week. They were a little overpriced in both of their matches. Granted, they did win. They reverse swept Vegas, but yeah, I got swept by Miami, a team we fully expect to not be in the top half this year. Yeah, I think Toronto will have a pretty easy victory here. Will it be a sweep? I don't know. I think Carolina's maybe good enough to steal a search. So I think a 3-1 is probably the most likely outcome. That's what Toronto did to LAG. If we think LAG and Carolina are comparable, that makes sense that they might finish in a 3-1 fashion again. Yeah, the spread, the 40.5 spread, if anything, I'm going to look on Carolina's side for that. Yeah, nothing really interests me here. Fully expect a Toronto win. I'm rooting for Carolina as the 1580 match, but I don't see it happening. Good luck, Clayster. No.
All right. Now, this one's a friendly fire match here. Carolina versus Optic. Obviously, Optic favorites, but not as big as Toronto, but still not worth it to touch. I'm not. The weird thing about Call of Duty is sometimes the lines are like super sharp, where you're just like, I'm not touching any of this. But other times you're like, insane value, but other times you're like, I would never touch any of this for the life of me. I feel like you feel the same way? You're not touching this one?
Yeah, this one, not really. I don't know. Carolina, it's tough, right? They have the last game on Saturday, then first match on Sunday. That's a quick turnaround, so not a ton of time to prepare for a really good Optic team. We just talked about Surge having a tough weekend. Carolina's is arguably just as hard. Yeah, I don't know. Price is about right. I think Optic are a worse team than Toronto after what I saw last weekend. So a minus 500 on them, I guess, is justified. Carolina, these teams are iffy. I think Optic will win a Search and Destroy eventually. They're not just going to lose round 11s all year. This is a good team to get that on. I do think Optic are a class above when it comes to hardpoint and control. I think Carolina and Minnesota are probably comparable teams, and Optic easily beat them. A minus 200, though, to win in a map 4 or less is just not enticing at all. So, yeah, fully expect an Optic, probably 3-1, but not really going to touch it, no.
Sunday match 2. Look who's back, LAG. This is their only second match, right? Their only match of the weekend, yeah. This is their third match, yeah. LAG, plus 250, plus 1.5, plus 110, plus 162 on the map. LAG Thieves, minus 350, -1.5, -150. LAG map one spread +25.5. Doesn't LAG usually win this? Isn't the Battle of LA they usually somehow win these games?
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. No, you're right. LA Gorillas, for whatever reason, dominate this series as of late, and it really doesn't make sense when you think about how good the Thieves teams have been over the past few years. But yeah, no, you're totally right. Is this the one they're
Yeah.
gonna trip up on? Maybe, but I don't know. What do you think of the
Yes.
prices?
The thing is, I absolutely love LAG here. The thing is, looking at this number, this screams to me they're like the books have no idea what to do with LAG. Okay, they lose 3-1 to Toronto. Mostly expected. They took the search, whatever. Books didn't really adjust much. And they basically said, okay, maybe they're a little better, so they bumped them up. I think subliners -2.5 was like +150 or something. Okay, fine. Whatever. So maybe they're not that bad. Maybe they can pick off a map from New York subliners. They almost beat subliners. They almost 3-0'd subliners. And I think and subliners again 3-1 to Optic. Thieves lost to Surge and then lost 3-0 to a close 3-0 to FaZe. This line makes no sense. Is LAG actually good somehow?
Good.
This is the thing, right? Okay, there's not a lot of data points we have yet, and their only data points are against two good teams. But like, they did okay against Toronto, and they almost beat Subliners, a team that beat Optic. Again, now it's early, right? But if I'm manually doing the modeling in my head, that gets to like LEG is like the best non-top team. At that point, then this line should be even against Thieves.
Yeah, I'm not there yet. I was a little surprised though when I saw the price for this match, just because it's understandable though, right? LA Gorillas, if you ask the average fan, did they impress you? Did they perform better than expected or worse than expected? Everyone's going to say LAG outperformed expectations. And if you ask the same question about Thieves, everyone is going to say they way underperformed against two teams that they had a chance to beat. So I get why the price is where it is. I do think LA Gorillas might be not the worst team in the league. I don't think they're good enough to make champs. I think Thieves are still a class above. Breach are probably still a class above, despite the 0-2 record as well. They're not even close to FaZe, Ultra, Subliners, or Optic. But yeah, I think Gorillas could like mess up some teams' days toward the bottom end of the standings. Like you talk about Rocker, you talk about Vegas, Carolina, maybe Miami. LA Gorillas are going to win some matches off of those teams. Do they win this? Maybe. LA Thieves are a step down in competition for sure, and Gorillas very nearly beat Subliners last weekend. So I think LA Gorillas maybe are like a league average search team, and that means a lot, right? They beat Toronto in around 10. That is, it's one map, but that is a good result. And to take Subliners as far as they did in those searches, again, we expect New York to be a good search team. If LA Gorillas are that scrappy in search, can they pick off a hard point here or there? Or can they sneak out of control? Maybe. I totally get why you like LAG. I'm not quite there yet, but I have no interest in LA Thieves this weekend just based on what we saw 5 days ago, 6 days ago.
Yeah. And this is a friendly fire match for me as well. Here we go. This is raised to 1580 though. Breach versus Ultra. Ultra, again, pretty heavy favorites. I think it's very clear the books think they're the best team right now. I think maybe not champ price. They're not priced for champs that way, but the books clearly think very highly of them. -500 on the money line, -1.5, -200, -32.5 in the hard point. I'm just not there right now. I just am not in the mood for betting massive favorites. Yeah. The problem is we just know so little about some of these teams, right? Like, is Ultra a good team? Yes. Are they good enough to cover a -1.5 against Boston? Probably. -2.5? I'm not there with big spreads yet. next week when I have a model and I actually know what the price on this stuff should be, I'm down for it. But again, at this point, I'm still only picking spots where I see some values. I'm not picking like in 2 weeks. I'll be like, shouldn't be minus 32 and a half. That should be 45, and I'll be like, I'll pound the 32 and a half. But I don't have that yet. I have no read for if Ultra's that much better at hardpoint, if they're only a little better at hardpoint, right?
Yeah, I get it. If anything, I'm going to look at Breach Map 2, possibly, just based on what we saw last week from Toronto, right? Losing 6-4 to LAG in a search doesn't look great, but maybe it's not so bad because LAG looked competitive against New York. But yeah, we saw Boston against a Tier 1 team last weekend, and they kept it really close. They had a chance to win. I think they keep it close here. Again, I just think I'm higher than market on Boston. I don't really love any of the prices here, though. Toronto looked absolutely phenomenal in the respawns in their one series that they played last weekend. So yeah, they very well could be like the best hardpoint team in the game, and a 32.5 spread might be nothing, but I don't know. Yeah, in this game, it's hard to lay any number past like 20 right now, I feel like, in map 1. So yeah, I do expect Toronto to come out on top, but again, prices are just a little too high in this one. The same argument I made last week for their game against LAG. Those prices were just astronomical. This is tougher competition in theory, so the prices have come down pretty spot on, in my opinion. Yeah, I think Toronto get it done probably, but yeah, I'll be rooting for my Boston boys. But this weekend might be rough for me. I think you got a lot of favorites in our head-to-head matchups here.
Yeah, I think so. So wait, there's only 3 matches on Sunday?
Yes, so there's one match less than last weekend. Last weekend we had 11. This week we have 10. So
Yeah. So 3-4-3. Huh. Okay. Whatever. This makes no sense. But anyways, how am I minus 3.5 units? Was it like either weighted units? Is it like half
yeah,
unit, 1
yeah.
unit, 2 units? Oh, okay.
So the way I calculated this, like our number 1 picks are worth 2 units, our number 2 pick is worth 1 unit, and our number 3 pick is worth half a unit. That's just what I did for now. We can change that if we want, but I don't know. I thought that was a good distribution, but
It's good. I like that, yeah.
we'll see.
Again, it's super early, but you do have a lead in this game. But yeah, and look at us both tackling FaZe in their match against Surge there on the Friday. I like LAG. You've got Boston against Thieves as well. So actually, we're both fading Thieves. And then you're fading Toronto's hardpoint, which I think is fair. I don't want to over extrapolate from one map against a team that could actually be good, right? That's fair. I don't hate that play, but it's not bad. I'm not tailing that. And then, yeah, I'm just going to. I have it as number 3 pick, but I really like that. I'm probably going to play more of Miami versus Minnesota. Because the other thing, too, is the fact that Miami is basically even on the Thursday night game, on the Thursday game as well. So if they crush Vegas, then they're going to be like minus 163 against Minnesota. So you want to bet that game early.
Yeah, fair picks. We've talked a lot about Surge. I just think they'll keep it close and hard point based on what we saw last week. Boston, again, I believe in them maybe a little more than Thieves. If not, I think they're roughly equal. And then, yeah, the Carolina one I threw in there is a little bit of a dice roll. I did Search and Destroy plus 162. If you do the implied odds on that, they're giving Carolina about a 38% chance to win the search. And I just think that's a little too low. Toronto, we've seen one search map of, so not much to go off of, but they didn't look great. Not that Carolina looked great in search either, but backtrack 1 year, Toronto won about 50% of their searches. The team Clayster was on last year, they won about 60%. Obviously, it's a much different team this year, but yeah, I just think that map 2 could be pretty close. Plus 162 is a big number for me. Yeah, we'll see if we do better than last week. I think we will, but we'll see.
Yes. And then we will see you guys in 2024 with week 3 of the major. There's going to be 4 weeks for major 1. We'll be recording that on the Wednesday night, and then that'll be probably releasing on Wednesday slash Thursday, the 11th of January. So we will see you guys after the new year. There's going to be some COD this week. If you're a fan of college football, a lot of college football between now and then as well. A lot of good college football. So yeah, see everybody in what, like 3 weeks? Yeah, 3 weeks from now. It's a long time, but yeah, we'll see you guys in the new year, everybody. See ya.